I'm torn between making content frequently and spending the time to make better content. And remembering, I think it's just like some random professor, so it's not exactly scientifically valid, but I think he like split the class into two groups and had one group try and take the fewest amount of photos possible. It was a photography class. I don't know if I mentioned that. The fewest amount of photos, but like make them as good as they possibly could. And the other one was to not focus on making them high quality at all, but just take a ton of them. And the group that took the ton of pictures is the group that took the better pictures. So, despite the fact that I'm completely unedited and I haven't bothered to write any scripts and I ramble a lot, I'm just going to keep going. I think that's better. And in fact, I think that's really all I have to say on this matter. Anyway, there was asking one of my lab sisters, who's telling me that they were interested in hypnosis, what exactly was interesting to them and what they wanted to know about it. And of course, it's all the things that are the most difficult to describe, but also the things that are the most obviously the things that I should be describing, which is like, what is hypnosis? What is trance? How does it work? And what kinds of things can you expect to do in that state? The problem that I'm having is that all attempts to define it necessarily cut off a piece of what it is, which, I mean, I suppose that's true of reality in general. But sort of the whole point of a trance state is that it transcends rationality. And it's something that really is, you learn it by experiencing it. The first book that Milton Erickson produced that involved instructing anything in hypnosis was essentially just a recording of a transcript of a state, recording of a transcript of him hypnotizing of somebody who had come to him to learn, who had finished their schooling and was like a licensed therapist, right? And then he, gives some commentary on it. But basically one of the things that he's talking about throughout that whole thing is how it's experiential. It's an experiential learning, which is a different kind of learning than what you're used to if you've spent a whole bunch of time training in school. And it's not so much that training is that intellectual sort of left brain type training is necessarily a bad thing. It's just that it gets in the way of hypnosis. And I think that's one of the reasons why Milton Erickson was so hesitant to say anything about trance or any of those other things, is because you kind of can't. You kind of can't say anything about it. You can only show it to people. But what he did say, and what certainly is the case, he called it a special state of internal focus, essentially. And that's fairly accurate. But another thing that he points out that I think is probably more helpful than whatever the hell that means, is literally anytime you do any sort of internal focusing at all, if you're lost in reverie and someone has to say your name a couple of times before you hear them, you were in a trance. That's he calls it a common everyday trance. If you've ever daydreamed, you've been in a trance, essentially it's just you're focused so focused on the inside that the outside reality ceases to be the primary thing that you're focusing on. But it's one of those things where we don't make that distinction. Excuse me. At some point, I'm going to get like a better microphone and I'm going to stop coughing into it all the time. Anyway, I can't imagine it's fun to listen to. It's not helpful that I'm drinking yerba mate right now. Anyway, so it's basically just an internal state of focus, and from within that state, the thing that's most commonly happening from a therapeutic perspective, I mean, it sort of depends on your therapeutic demands. If you're a dentist who's trying to hypnotize somebody to avoid using anesthesia, then the thing that you're trying to accomplish is desensitization to pain, which is something that's perfectly legitimate. And in fact, before the invention of anesthetics, that was how surgery was done. But one of the things that's interesting about hypnosis is if there is an easy way, usually you won't be able to be hypnotized to do it. So like, given the choice between taking an anesthetic and doing the sort of, it's rather intellectually demanding to turn yourself off to a point where someone can cut your body open and remove organs or whatever needs to happen, right? And so, yeah. But the thing that I've had more experience with, I mean, I've never performed surgery using hypnosis, but what I have done is gone in and reorganized my perceptions. And that's really the big thing that, from a psychotherapeutic standpoint, hypnosis is most common and best for. So like, for example, the easy one is like, if you've got a phobia, there's a couple of different options to you to deal with that phobia. There's exposure therapy, which does work. But you can also just you can pretty easily just go in and access the memory that initially caused a phobia and reorganize your perceptions around it so that you can recognize the distinction between that initial state and the state that's being triggered in your everyday life. It's important to note that Milton Erickson was a psychiatrist who was trained in the time when in America that meant you were trained in psychoanalysis. And so that certainly that guides his approach, and it guides my approach too, because in order to understand Milton Erickson, I've had to study psychodynamic approaches. And in fact, actually, Jung is much better for understanding Erickson than Freud ever was, although Jung drifts off into his archetypes. And that's what most people who know about Jung, they start with collective unconscious, archetypal, synchronicity type stuff, which, I mean, there's good work there, but it's essentially incomprehensible if you don't understand the more basic fundamental concept of complexes. That's probably what I should do my next rant into the void on, is complexes, because that is really the bread and butter of what I do. But essentially, I sort of talked about this a bit, I think, with dream interpretation, in that your brain, the way that your psyche organizes the things in your head is through these groups, these associational networks. That's what Freud called them initially, was associational networks. Which, you know, it's hard to say this with scientific validity, but like these tests haven't necessarily been done. But it seems pretty likely that those are just your neurons, right? I mean, that's sort of how they organize themselves with a base. What is that? The axon, right? And then the dendrites that branch off of it. Anyway, I don't want to get into neuroscience because I am woefully undereducated on that. And like I say, the research has not been done. So it's a distraction to go into that too deeply. It's purely hypothetical. Anyway,